We are very lucky to have Satinder Gill. She has a doctorate in psychology. She's from UC Davis's Academic and Staff Assistant Program, otherwise known as ASAP. And she's here to present to us today on wellness at work. And of course, wellness at work would also transfer to home and outside of work. Today, she would appreciate if you could put your questions in the chat, and then she will answer them at about 12:20 or so. Thank you so much, and welcome, Satinder.
Thank you, Jody, and welcome to all of you who took time to log in today. I hope you're able to really sort of settle in and give yourself this opportunity to hear the content, think about how you can make the content meaningful to your lives, and any questions that come up. Hopefully we can have a pretty intimate conversation towards the end, particularly if we have a small group. So you're all lucky in that we can certainly personalize the material that I'm going to go over today. But please settle in and allow yourself to sort of connect with what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to start out with just an overview of our services. If you haven't heard about our department before, or if you have and maybe you're not sure about all the different things we do, I'll go into that a little bit. But the majority of the time I'm going to spend on how stress manifests for us and some ways that we can start to take care of ourselves. So if you have questions as I go along, you can start putting them into the box now, or you can hold off until the last 10 minutes or so. But I will then go ahead and sort of pause my presentation portion and take a look at those. So starting out, and also remember to shift the pages here, which of course are now not going to shift. Give me a moment. Sorry, just a moment here as I figure out why this is not moving on. I'm trying to sort out, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, just I needed to call for help, and then it worked. And so the goals again are going to be to overview the services, identify the signs and symptoms of stress, and then how gratitude and self-compassion can maybe help us cope with stress. So our services that are offered at the main campus, I think to start off, we have two physical locations. We have a location at the academic campus in Davis, and then we have a location in Sacramento at the medical campus. And so we have different staff at each campus, but you're able to see staff in person if you're able to make it in person. I know many of you are at remote sites, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But if you're able to access us for an in-person appointment, you can come to either location. Oftentimes people do it at the site that they work at. Other times they live in the other city. And so if they're doing it, after work, or if they have various work hours, then they might choose to go to the other site. But in any case, either in Davis or at the medical campus, there are counseling services that are offered. And those are free services or part of your benefits package as being a staff or faculty member at UC Davis. The services are confidential, so we hold the same HIPAA requirement that any community provider would hold. We are the custodian of our own records, so they don't go to HR, they don't go to any department in any way on campus. We are responsible for our own records, so you have confidentiality when you come here. And then they're typically individual services, but we do also extend services to members of a household of a staff or faculty member who are over the age of 18. And so we do not work with children, and that has somewhat to do with various laws that apply to working with children, but we will see other adults that are in the home. And so it could be an adult child, partner or spouse, or extended family member that happens to be living with you at the time. They're also welcome to come in, and they can come in and schedule their own appointment. We sort of take their word up for it that they're affiliated with a staff or faculty member. You do not have to be involved in their scheduling of the appointment. So we offer short-term services. So oftentimes people will see us for a problem that's appearing, and it could be a work-related problem or it could be a personal problem. And so oftentimes the same problem is impacting them in both areas of their life. And so we see people for things like depression and anxiety, or issues with a coworker or supervisor, or parenting concerns, marital issues. So sort of the whole spectrum of types of difficulties an individual could be experiencing. And then if they need longer term support, we look for a community provider through their behavioral health insurance plan. And so as a staff or faculty member, you have benefits. We sort of help you narrow down what the options are and connect you with a provider in the community. And then oftentimes we also offer referrals for campus resources. And this is important because many of the other campus departments do not hold confidentiality. And so, for example, you're experiencing discrimination in the workplace and you go to report that, that starts to become something that goes on record and needs to be investigated. Oftentimes people will come to our office first to maybe talk about the impact that that's had on them, sort out if they want to report it, how they're going to report it, maybe learn a little bit about what the process entails in a confidential manner. Similarly, so it may be Title IX office or HJAP office for some of those types of issues. They're having workplace problems. They might want to come and discuss those. And then if we ultimately decide that they want to go through the ombuds, they can go in that direction. So we'd refer them there if they needed mediation, for example, and all the parties were willing. And so sometimes we're a place that people stop for referrals to campus departments, not because they don't know about them, but they want to sort of talk about it in a confidential manner before accessing it. Same thing for disability concerns or accessing disability accommodations. Oftentimes people will start with a conversation here, and then ultimately we link them with that department. Consultation services, these are often sought out by managers or supervisors, but any other employee can also seek them out. This is usually because there's an interpersonal dynamic that's happening in the workplace. It's problematic and often has something to do with an issue that's psychological in nature. Supervisor, supervisee concerns that are coming up, change management, so an organization that's going through changes in leadership, changes in structure, often cause conflict in the workplace. So people come in for individual services, and so we see the individuals who's presenting with that problem and help either offer executive coaching to that person if they're a supervisor or manager, or help them think through the problem and identify steps that they would need to take. Violence prevention services, we are an office that will take reports of workplace violence. And so if you need to seek consultation about an issue that's come up, or you need to report an issue that's come up, most people are obligated in their roles to report instances of workplace violence. We would be an office you would call. And that particular service is not confidential because we would need to then look into the issue. And so let's say there was an incident in the workplace and you wanted to discuss it. If you came in for counseling, we would hold in confidentiality. If you were calling to report an incident of workplace violence, and we would sort this out with you before you got into the content, that would be something that the university, you'd essentially be putting us on notice. There's this problem in the workplace that's escalated to violence has already occurred. And so then we have a team that meets, it's an interdisciplinary team, people from various departments, legal counsel, HR, our office, and some others that would assess risk. And so if there's imminent risk, of course, call the police department. But if there's sort of escalating concerns, or maybe an incident has already happened and you want someone to come out and talk to your group and kind of do a debriefing, you could certainly get in touch with our office. Recharge services, these are fee for service. And so we offer in-depth departmental consultations and in-depth tailored presentations. And so if you're looking for something very specific to your group, or you're looking for some organizational support, maybe assessing some of those interpersonal dynamics, but in more detail, maybe with the whole team involved. If there's a piece of that that's psychological in nature, we would help support you through that, and then you would understand that you'd be paying for that service. There's also a department on campus called Organizational Excellence that takes some of those consultations. And so we would sort of help you figure out which department would be more appropriate and how to connect with them to essentially get the support that you're looking for. So that's a sort of quick overview of our services. And if you have questions, again, feel free to drop them in the box. And at the end, I will also give you my contact information. So if you need to get in touch, you're welcome to do so. Let's sort of move into the bulk of what we're going to spend our time on today, which is going to be identifying stress and figuring out how to manage stress. And so kind of a working definition of stress is a state that results within an individual when they've reached their capacity to cope. And it's typically due to the demands of a circumstance or situation. And so oftentimes, what might not be stressful today could end up being stressful tomorrow. There's sort of a culmination of things that come together and make any particular time a stressful time. And the individual has sort of maxed out their ability to cope with that problem or that set of circumstances. This is very common if the circumstances are long-standing. And so if the environment around the person doesn't change, or if there's something that's out of their control, that's sort of an ongoing issue, it's very likely that stress is going to start to manifest for that individual, because they may have the ability to cope, but the fact that it's been going on for so long is then diminishing their ability to cope. And that's often resulting in burnout or just dissatisfaction in the workplace. And then self-care, I would define as the practice of taking care of yourself and sort of being an active participant in your own well-being. And so the ability that you have to sort of recognize what's coming up for you and be able to effectively respond to it. Now, I want to be careful to mention that self-care alone will not fix an organizational issue. So if you have, departmental concerns that have been ongoing for some time, funding issues, if you have just sort of an unmanageable workload, those types of things that are truly environmental problems, we want to be careful not to sort of recommend self-care for those problems, if you will, as the prescription, because there may truly need to be some change in the environment. At the same time, the ability to take care of yourself in a stressful environment is a mitigating factor to burnout. So I'll talk briefly here about how we respond to stress, because we all encounter stress on a sort of day-to-day basis, and our ability to manage that stress is going to be based on a couple of different processes that we engage in. And these processes happen automatically, often within milliseconds. So the goal is to start to become aware. So one of the things I hope you'll take away today is really the importance of self-awareness. So if there's a trigger or an event, something hassling us, a sort of life demand, that's kind of what is identified here as it's the top of this cycle that you're going to see. So there's a trigger that happens that's sort of outside of you, and then there's your internal process. Okay, so there's the problem that's out there, and then there's the problem that starts to be created internally. And the initial step is going to be what we think about that situation. So a situation happens, and whether we're aware of it or not, again, within milliseconds, we start to form a story about that situation. Okay, so I'll give you an example of you're driving into work and you hit traffic. So traffic is the situation, and now you start to have thoughts about that situation. So maybe your primary appraisal, how you think about that situation, is something along the lines of, I'm going to be late to work, my boss is going to be upset. Okay, that's been your primary appraisal. Your secondary appraisal is now how do you think about your ability to cope? And so what are your thoughts about your ability to manage that appraisal that you just did? And so maybe something to the extent of, I'm afraid of my boss's response. I don't really handle it very well when they become upset. The third piece that starts to come up, and again, these are happening, relatively quickly. So sometimes it sort of feels like it's happening at the same time, is a stress response. Your defense that's going to kick in to help you manage that stress is going to be an emotional response, a physiological response, a behavioral response. So essentially, what is it that you start doing? What is it you start feeling? What is it that you start experiencing in your body? So maybe your heart rate's going up, maybe your temperature starts to change, maybe your mood starts to shift. And so all of that is happening as your stress response. And then lastly, your coping response is going to be whatever you do when you're stressed. And so maybe you're a person who turns on the music and starts to sort of use the time to enjoy something pleasurable. Or alternatively, maybe you're a person who is sort of repetitively looking at the GPS, looking for alternative routes, trying to problem solve this issue. Maybe you're a person who gets really agitated themselves and starts honking and sort of trying to shift lanes when there's not much ability to move around. So you're gonna have some coping response, some way that you then deal with this stressful incident that has occurred. So the idea is to start to get awareness for yourself, start to recognize what comes up for you, how you manage it. And then if you're recognizing signs and symptoms that are on this sheet here, these are really the times that you want to start to reach out for support. So if you're having a stress-related response that starts to turn into symptoms that sort of last, maybe they last a couple of days to a few weeks, maybe you've had these and you're starting to recognize them now, this is the point where you may want to reach out for professional support because at this point, it has started to impact your behavior, it started to impact your body. So you see we've broken this into physical complaints that start to manifest for people, work-related issues they start to experience, and emotional problems. And I'll let you sort of read through these because I really want to get to the part about, well, gosh, we have this stress, it's happened, it's sort of a part of life, what do we do about it? So if you recognize these, please feel free to reach out for further support. Talked about the importance of self-awareness so that you can start to bring it into your conscious awareness that you are in distress. And the way to do that is, again, start to pay attention to your cognitions. What are your thoughts? What are your behaviors? How are you feeling? Physiologically, what's happening in your body? What is your central nervous system doing? And so it's ramping up. And then how is that manifesting in your body? Spiritual or / meaning making, how are you sort of creating a story or creating a narrative about why there's stressful events in life? And then interpersonal is important because particularly in a workplace is, you have your way of managing stress, other people have their way of managing stress, and then there's an interpersonal dynamic that's happening. So there's your experience, their experience, and then the experience is happening between the two of you. So you probably all have a sense right now of a coworker you could go to that really supports you in a time of distress, and a coworker you would never go to because it's not supportive in a time of distress. So there's that exchange that happens between two people. So you want to have a sense for yourself, how do you engage with other people when you're stressed? Thinking traps, so the cognitive piece of the wheel, the different types of thoughts you will have. When we're in distress, our thoughts tend to not make a lot of sense because our hindbrain is taken over and is attempting to regulate our body and regulate our safety again. And so something threatening has happened, and it could be real perceived, right? And so traffic ultimately is not really threatening, if you will, but there's the perceived threat because it's related to being late, it's related to job security, and your mind sort of continues down that narrative, and it starts to feel scary or frustrating at the least. And so your mind tends to not think very clearly. So these are some types of places your mind tends to go to when you're distressed. So I encourage you to sort of read through these and see if you identify with any of them, and then see if you can identify them in the moment as they're happening. And so in the moment that you're in a stressful event, and start with minor stressful events. Think of something like you went to the grocery store to pick up an item and they're out of that item, right? So where does your mind start to go? Do you start to personalize it and say, this always happens to me. This is definitely my fault. I should have come yesterday, right? Or do you start to catastrophize it? If this is the worst thing that's happened all day, what am I gonna eat for dinner now? So thinking about where your mind goes when it's in distress. These are essentially thinking traps because you're likely to get stuck there and they're not accurate. It's not an accurate appraisal of the situation. So take some time to take a look at them and sort of see how many of them come up for you, how many of them tend to come up in a stressful situation. I want to talk a bit about setting the culture, particularly in the workplace. Our behaviors are likely to adapt to the people around us. And so it's important, regardless of our role, whether you're a supervisor or supervisee, often even if you're a supervisor, you're being managed by someone else, is setting a workplace culture that allows people to manage their distress. So first you have to be aware, right? How do you respond? How do you engage with others when they're stressed out? What self-care practices do you have? How do you maintain your own well-being? How do you make sense of things? How do you make sense of change that happens in the workplace, stress that happens in the workplace, circumstances that are out of your control in the workplace? And then what do you do between people? Do you express appreciation for the people around you? Oftentimes, after salary and benefits, when we ask people what makes them want to stay in a job, it's a sense of connectedness. It's a sense of feeling respected and valued. And so taking the time to express appreciation and gives people a sense of it, that their work matters, but more importantly, that they matter. So their role within the organization matters. Boundary setting, do you take your sick time? Do you take your lunches? Do you take your breaks? Do you respect people when they're on vacation and not expect them to check email? Do you leave work on time? So what are your boundaries that you engage with coworkers and within yourself in the workplace? And then supporting others. And so along all of these lines, how do you support others in doing the same for themselves? I want to speak quickly to this before I open it up to questions. Strategies to self-regulate. So if you recognize the distress, which I'm really emphasizing is step one, what do you do about it? I'm going to talk about two techniques pretty quickly today, but if you want more information, you can reach out for more information, or you could visit these two sources that I've provided here. The Greater Good Center out of UC Berkeley has a number of articles. They have in-person and online workshops that they offer. They have courses, certification programs. So it's a really robust program that researches many topics, but gratitude is one of them. And we're going to speak a bit about that today. So I wanted to give you the information for this if you wanted to follow up with them. And then selfcompassion.org is Dr. Kristen Neff's work. And I believe she's out of the University of Houston in Texas. And she is a pioneer researcher on self-compassion. We'll talk a bit about that as well. And she has audios you can listen to that are on her site, research-based articles to support the idea of self-compassion and how it buffers burnout in the workplace. And she also has a self-report inventory that I encourage you to take. I have taken it and encourage you to take it if you're further interested in this topic and how to apply it to yourself and how to really apply it within a team in the workplace. So quickly here, that the idea of self-compassion is essentially offering yourself the compassion you would offer others. And so mirroring that back for yourself. And I would say that most people, when they start, really recognize that they have difficulty with this, because what they immediately hit is their own judgment. And so if you try to say something kind to yourself, chances are your mind is already going to be habituated to judging or criticizing yourself, because oftentimes, particularly in Western culture, we use this to motivate ourselves. And so there's sort of a reconditioning that has to happen. But you can try this out the next time you're distressed, is practicing the steps of kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, because those are the 3 factors she's found through research that contribute to self-compassion, versus judgment, isolation, and over-identification. Over-identification being really becoming enmeshed with the difficulty you're experiencing at the point in time you're experiencing it, as the things that tend to lead to issues like burnout, depression, anxiety, and a host of other problems. So kindness would be something as simple as saying, I'm sorry you're having a difficult time, versus judgment, something along the lines of, you always screw this up. And so if you think about what you might say to yourself versus a loved one, someone you care about, maybe even a coworker, you're more likely to use judgment towards yourself than kindness. Again, it's a conditioned response. It's sort of how we've been brought up in society, but it's also, because it is a conditioned response, it gives us hope that we can recondition it. So we can condition ourselves towards self-kindness, and that then provides a buffer to burnout or a host of psychological issues that could come up. Common humanity is the sense that everyone struggles at work from time to time, versus my job is the worst, which would be isolation, really removing yourself from the collective. Mindfulness is being aware that you're aware of the experience. And so we don't have enough time to really get into this, but there's essentially the part of you that's having the experience. Then there's a part of you that can see that you're having the experience. You can essentially kind of be the passenger to the person driving, right? So I'm aware that I'm having this feeling, versus I'm feeling this way and I either want it to go away or I want it to last really, forever if it's a positive experience. So we've over-identified with the experience we're having. Gratitude is particularly important, again, because it provides that buffer. It is often sort of the simple but underappreciated things that we want to express gratitude for. And so recognizing and appreciating your worth, your value, your contributions, and that of others. And so if you're having a difficult time with this, start out by listing other things that you're grateful for and moving towards things within yourself. So there's a couple of different examples here of places to start. You want to start with everyday experiences. So you don't want to go for the big, I'm grateful for the international vacation, because that's going to come maybe once in a lifetime, maybe every few years if you're really lucky. But the everyday experiences that are right in front of you, they could be possessions, things you have. Really importantly, are relationships, your connectedness to other people. We're interconnected as mammals. And so our sense of belonging and safety relies on other people. And so you want to look for things that are interconnected. And a good example, something easy to start with, is the clothing that you're wearing. And so if you think about the clothing that you have on today, you can easily start to create a web of interdependence. And so how many people have contributed to this? Farmers, if you're wearing cotton, who grew the cotton, designers, seamstresses, store owners, everyone who made it possible for you to have this clothing. Maybe someone gifted it to you. Thinking further about the processes that allow you to keep it clean, that allow you to keep it well maintained. So laundry services, the washing machine, a variety of different things that start to really connect you to things that you could be grateful for having in your life. The second one is really important, and that's making contact with your breath. That's something that's always available to you. That's how you're alive. And so your breath is allowing your organs to function. It's keeping you alive. And being thankful that you can breathe with ease. Or if you're having difficulty breathing, and we're in the valley, at least Sacramento where I'm at, we're in the valley, there's people with a number of medical interventions, supported devices that are helping them breathe. And so just the technology, the science that's went into making that available for them to be able to breathe and be able to sustain life, that is something that you could be incredibly grateful for. There's a couple other examples there. I'll let you read through them because I really want to make sure we get to the Q&A portion. And if you have further Q&A after today, or you'd like to make an appointment, there's some ways to do that. You can contact our office directly, and we schedule over the phone. Or if you wanted a little bit more information, you could go to our website to learn more about the program. And then my email, I can provide it to you, is simply drgill@ucdavis.edu. And so if you wanted to get in touch with me individually, you're also welcome to do that. So I'm going to take a look, and if you have questions, go ahead and start typing them into the box here. Looks like we've had some additional people be able to join. We're at 17 participants right now. And so if you have questions about the content or other questions that have come up for you as I've been speaking, please feel free to type them in, and then I will be able to review them here. So the first question that's come in, I'll read it here, says, if travel expenses are paid, would you or your department be willing to travel to another location? San Diego, I will come to San Diego and provide a presentation. I was gonna say it depends where. So we do get presentation requests for various different types of needs. So I would say it depends on the need that's available, meaning would it be required for one of us to go, or is there a similar enough service that we could link you to in the area? And then would there be a charge for the time and salary of the person? So no, it's a part of our department, it's part of our general responsibilities to do this type of work. It really depends on the need that the program is having to make sure that it's a justifiable use of funds. And if that is the case, then we've traveled, some examples are we've traveled to Butte County to provide support and debriefing after the fires there. We've traveled to Lake Tahoe to provide support. If there's a grief or loss, there was one in Bodega Bay that comes to mind of somebody who's really impactful within the department. And so numerous staff members are struggling with that. So those are types of situations that we would travel for. Other times it's maybe high organizational conflict, and that is already covered as part of our job description. And so the hosting department does not need to take on any cost. The ability to pay for costs for travel is something that we could look into, because that piece I'm not quite sure about.
Yeah, and before everybody leaves, I just want to make sure that you'll fill out our, in the chat box, there's a survey, but so what I'm hearing too, Dr. Gill, is that it depends on the need. How does one survey the need and identify it as a need for the travel? Like, I understand with the fires, that's a very important thing. Does someone just contact your location and describe the need, and then someone else, identifies whether it's the need, that there is a need for travel?
So they would contact our department, and you contact myself or our director, and essentially we talk about it and we sort of look at, resources, timing, staff, et cetera, and then the type of issue, and if it's something that our department would handle, or if there's another department, because there are also EAP programs across the entire UC system. And so something like this, and we do help support each other. And so we've reached out to UCLA in the past. I think staff from here went down to UC Merced in the past. So staff are able to step in and support if needed. We have an agreement across the UC system with the EAP programs that do exist, the employee assistance programs. The who pays for travel question, that I'm just not sure about logistically, and so I'd have to check. And because my sense is in the past, it is staff from our department have been reimbursed through our department, and I don't think that the other department has hosted, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay, now you have another question from Rob. Do you want me to read it out loud, Dr. Gill? You have it there.
Let's see. So Rob is saying jobs have been particularly stressful regarding response. It's more the interactions with others that cause distress. Find my boss as well as a few others around the office to be high stress or unhappy. I transfer these emotions easily to myself. It ends up making me feel moody. How can I deal with that? Sometimes it feels like it's ruining my day. How others anxious or isolated because I avoid certain people to avoid negativity. And so Rob's question is essentially, I think, getting at the interpersonal dynamic that happens, right? And so Rob, and then I also see a question here, because it looks like we're almost at the end of our time, but if there are follow-up questions here, if people have time, I'm happy to stay in the chat box and answer them, or happy to stay online if you're able to. So Rob, to answer your question, I would say that may be something that you're absolutely welcome to call in for, and we can speak individually about how to manage some of those interpersonal dynamics, because they'd really need a better sense of what is that's going on, the organizational issues that are impacting these individuals, or maybe they have personal life issues that are going on. And essentially, I think it's an important question because there is sort of a reality that we co-regulate to the people around us. So we tend to take on the emotions of others. And there's some ways to start to recognize that within ourselves and sort of figure out how to build in emotional boundaries. So there's physical boundaries, some of the examples I gave of, taking your break, taking your lunch, etc. But there's some emotional boundaries that can be put in place. And so please feel free to call in if you'd like to talk a bit more about that. But what I see in your question is really the reflection of that, is how do I work in a challenging environment where it's really not the demands of the job, but it's the interpersonal nature of the job. And to be honest, I think some people are looking for more of an interpersonal connection in their workplace and others are not. So it could also be about the organizational culture and the expectations within that department. So I'd be happy to talk offline further about that. Sound meditations, bells, ocean waves, flutes, birds. So essentially sounds to be able to listen to. Absolutely. I have a list of resources. And Jody, is it okay if I send them over to you and then you can distribute them? Do you have contact information for the folks who logged in today?
Yeah, I will be able to download the information of the folks who contacted me today and send that to you, to them. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I do have a list of meditation and mindfulness resources that I'd be happy to forward you. There's also a number of apps on phones for iPhone users or Android users. And I think the difficulty sometimes is not knowing what is a valid app to use. And so I will send along some that have been supported or that are created by psychologists, and then some of the online resources where there's either free audios to listen to or additional trainings to take in this area if you're interested.
That's wonderful. And Dr. Gill, I just have a silly question for you, but I think it's a good reminder. You get stressed out too sometimes, do you not?
I do.
That's good to know.
So absolutely. And I think that if there are, I know that within, first of all, I forgot to mention at the very beginning is I appreciate the person who did the wordplay on webinar today. And so if there are folks within that sort of broader department of A&R, because I know many of you have, direct contact jobs where you're in a helping capacity. So if you're experiencing sort of job burnout, which is, that applies to people in all types of professions. For people in helping professions or people in sort of situations that are maybe more acute in nature, there's kind of always something stressful happening in the context of your job. And certainly therapists are in a position where we're managing other people's distress. And so the idea of burnout certainly applies, and that's sort of for overall career satisfaction. But more commonly what happens is either a concept of compassion fatigue or secondary trauma, meaning it's not that you don't want to do your job anymore. It's just that you've sort of lost the umph, if you will, for your work. And I think particularly within helping professionals, we get a lot of training in this area. So absolutely, I have stressful moments. But we also have a pretty protective buffer in place in that throughout our doctoral training, we get support for how to manage not only our own distress, but to start to recognize if we're leaning towards compassion fatigue or secondary trauma. And so when I was discussing the types of presentations we do, if you're in one of those smaller departments where you have a lot of direct contact with high risk populations or situations that are really challenging in nature, feel free to reach out separately and we can arrange something about the topic of secondary trauma or compassion fatigue separately.
Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And know everybody that if you still have questions, Dr. Gill gave us her contact information, or you could, get her through this phone number, 530-752-2727. So I want to thank you so much for spending your time. I found it very useful, and I think other people may have. I heard some thanks in the chat box.
Excellent. Well, it was nice to be with all of you today, and I hope that you sort of carry yourself with self-compassion through the rest of your workday.
Thank you so much, Dr.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you, Satinder. It was wonderful.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's really, really wonderful. And I hope we can ask you to do something like this again in about a year or so.
Absolutely. You could always reach out, and if this avenue through technology works best for you all, we're happy to continue to present this way.
Now, I will be forwarding your name in particular to a couple of supervisors that I had mentioned to you before, just so that they can talk to you. I had wished they were on the call today, but I didn't see their names there. But I will also let them know to look at the recording and maybe, to reach out to you.
Great. Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.